Welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show. I'm Mark, and I'm here with my buddy Caleb, who you may or may not recognize since he is wearing a full, serious Spider-Man costume. Caleb, I love it. It's perfect for the show. How are you, sir?
I'm good, and I didn't tell Mark I was going to put on the mask.
I was good. I had a nice little happy surprise. Listen, our show is sponsored by progressivechristianity.org. We really want to encourage you to go check them out. If you've not looked at them before, there's some great resources there for progressive Christians, from readings and writings and liturgies and all kinds of things. So please check them out. Also, quick little reminder, if you are watching us record this live, please, in the comment sections, any questions or thoughts that pop up, leave those there. We will try to address them in the final segment. And last and very importantly, this is not a spoiler-free podcast.
Very important.
This is a loud spoiler alert for you. There will be spoilers probably right off the bat. But before we get to that, importantly, what will you be drinking today, sir?
Yes. So today we are talking about Spider-Man No Way Home, and I have got my Spider-Man drink here.
Ooh, so very nice.
You can kind of see it's got red down at the bottom,
right?
Grenadine, and it's got vodka and lime juice and some water and blue curacao.
Very nice. Well, we'll both, in a very unusual move, we'll both be drinking vodka.
Oh,
I know. I went to
no bourbon. You didn't find a way to work
I should have figured out how to work some bourbon in. Yeah. I've got bourbon around for backup if I need to. So, but I'm doing a Dr. Strange drink. There's this drink called Black Magical Shimmer, and it's supposed to use black vodka, but I live in North Carolina where the alcohol beverage control is weird, and you can't get black vodka. But I did find, so I had to switch it up. I found a cola vodka, which is made in the U.S., which I think is really important considering all the world news going on right now. And I added some Starbucks cold brew coffee to it.
Ooh.
And then I don't know if this comes through. You see, I've got shimmering stars on the rim. I rimmed it with that.
Oh, I can see it. Yeah.
And there is opal dust in the drink to give it kind of a magical brew look. So
it looks like brew.
I'm calling it a strange dark magic.
Strange dark magic. And how does it taste, Mark?
Well, let's find out.
Okay.
I can drink one of those.
Drink one.
Yeah, that's a good thing since I'm going to be, right?
That's right.
All right. Well, listen, I am so excited about about this. You and I both made one of our first trips during COVID period to the theaters to watch this show.
Yep.
This is going to be fun, man.
It's going to be great. Cheers, Mark.
Cheers, sir.
Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show, where today we're talking about Spider-Man No Way Home, and Mark and I are ready to geek out about Spider-Man. Mark, I've got to tell you that I was in high school when the kind of early 2000s Spider-Man came out. And
was that Garfield or was
that was the Tobey Maguire stuff, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. And at the time, we were kind of past the Joel Schumacher Batman stuff, but before any of the really super dark superhero movies had come out. And so Spider-Man was important for for those of us who were geeks in high school and liked to watch comic book movies before it was really acceptable to do that.
Right.
And so I loved watching Spider-Man, and I've been a big fan of the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies as well. I think they've been great. And I really loved getting into the theater for the first time, or one of the first times after this recent COVID surge. And it was exciting to go and see the movie. And it was especially exciting, again, not a spoiler-free zone, to see the convergence of the multiverse and to see some of the different Spider-Men all come together, because within the last 20 years, we've had 3 different iterations of Spider-Man. What was that like for you, Mark, to be watching that?
It was amazing. I'm glad that it was Spider-Man was one of the movies that I'm first in watching. And kind of the same thing. Like, I was always interested. I mean, you have that thing with Sony and Marvel and who owns Spider-Man. And so we get these weird iterations. And so there was that going on. It was good to feel like it was, yet again, we get to include it in the MCU, which made me very happy. But I'm kind of like you. Spider-Man was one of those that I was also interested to see how they were going to bring it in.
Yep.
Because it's a high school kid, and it's got different themes than a lot of the other Marvel comics. And kind of like you, when I was in high school, I was a bit of a geek as well. And I'm trying to get off the one of my stars from this.
The star is stuck to you, Mark.
It's stuck to me. It's the only way I'm ever going to be a star is to have one on my lip. But anyway,
you're a star to me, Mark.
I love it. Thank you so much. But yeah, in high school, it was easy to identify with Peter Parker. Partly because he was a teenager dealing with the same stuff that we were dealing with. So it was really fun to get to see this in the movie. There'd been enough spoilers at this point that we all kind of knew that we're going to get all 3 of them.
Right.
And we get kind of a great explanation of how we bring these 3 together and make it make sense. We have all these movies and different stories and different even MJs, and what are we going to do with all of this? And I thought it was a lot of fun to watch how they solved that.
It was
use the multi, don't you think?
Yeah, it was great. And I thought, I always kind of wondered if the multiverse idea could really work in film. And I thought they were brilliant in trying that out in Into the Spider-Verse in the cartoon in kind of a lower risk environment. And that was so popular and so much fun that it clearly worked. And I think one of my favorite moments, though, because everyone knows you and I are both DC fans too,
right?
And the little nod to the DC world where this is also happening at the moment, where the fake friend has written a book called Flashpoint, right? which in the DC world is what opens up the multiverse. And
exactly.
So I got a kick out of that.
And it worked really well, since there is a character called Flash Thompson that has been in Spider-Man movies before. So it just was brilliant. I loved all the little nods that they did to other stuff. Like, turns out that at least in Peter Parker and Tom Holland's world, Star Wars is a thing, because he has, they make the star, the Death Star, and he has the little star, the figurine from it. So lots of little fun things. And did you catch Electro's shout out to Miles, the Miles version?
Yeah.
I figured there has to be a black Spider-Man in the universe somewhere, and I just love it.
That's one of my favorite parts, because it's towards the end of the movie, and he's found out the identity of his Spider-Man. And he says, "Man, you were from what,
Brooklyn,
from Brooklyn?
And you help poor folks." And
I figured you'd be black.
Exactly.
And so that I do wish it would have been kind of fun. I mean, there were too many Spider-Men to introduce anymore, but it would have been cool to see Miles Morales somehow in there. Maybe in the future, maybe that's going to be the next iteration. Maybe that's what it's going to look like as we enter the next phase of Spider-Man.
I tell you, I really hope that we get a live action Spider-Verse, or even a kind of crossover, like almost a Roger Rabbit, where we get a few of them are cartoons, because in their universe they're actually cartoons and not real people. So I just think there's lots of opportunities and really fun.
And they're making another Spider-Verse. Did
Yes,
you see that?
I am
Across
excited
the
about that.
Spider-Verse.
Yes.
So maybe they'll surprise us, Mark, and we'll get some live action Spider-Man in Across the
Absolutely
Spider-Verse.
fantastic. So let's move on though and talk a little bit about some of the really, like, we both love superhero shows, but we also recognize all of the faults that come along with these kinds of shows, where
absolutely
it's frequently someone who's just using brute force to make things right, to make some, you know, to fix, to end the bad guy kind of thing.
Right.
And honestly, I didn't know any different when I showed up for this one. I assumed that we'd probably see a lot of that same kind of understanding of how do you keep a bad person from hurting the world. You know, you use force and you lock them up. And I really loved, again, this is not a spoiler-free zone, I loved the handling that they did in processing through this. You know, you see, particularly Peter, you see him struggling with how to handle these bad guys. So the several of the bad guys from the other Spider-Man's movies show up because of something that Peter does that's a very teenager boy, like anxious and anxiety ridden, and keep messing things up and causes a crack in the multiverse. And we get all these bad guys showing up, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And so for me, his instinct, his instinct was, I'm going to push this button on the thing that Dr. Strange just made, and I'm going to send him back so I don't have to deal with this, you know?
Yeah.
And then Aunt May calls him back and says, you know, you got to do the right thing, man.
Yep. You know, that was interesting, Mark. And I do love, I'm with you. I tried to stay away from as many spoilers as I could. And you and I both saw this kind of late. And I actually managed to. I knew that there were going to be villains. I didn't know there were going to be multiple Spider-Men. So that was a surprise for me.
That's good.
And I knew nothing about the plot. And I was surprised as well to see that there was a little bit more depth to some of the villains, and that ultimately they were talking about the salvation of these villains, and that's what the whole plot of the movie is about this Tom Holland Spider-Man 1 doing what he can to help these villains from other universes, which I thought was really fascinating.
Absolutely. And it's cool to see his struggle with it, because there are moments where he doesn't want to do that. And I do, like you said, I do love the way that they fleshed out more some of the villains, quote, villains' background. So we understand, like Green Goblin, we never really understood what was going on. And we caught little bits of it. We started to understand that, and for me, there was a lot of, and we can talk about this in the next segment, there was a lot of commentary about how we treat bad guys and villains and people like that. Particularly, and I think Green Goblin was the one that opened the door to this, folks who might be not really bad folks as much as suffering from some kind of mental health. Now, we all too frequently immediately say, well, that someone's got a mental health issue, if blah, blah, blah. But sometimes folks really do. And the majority of folks with mental health issues that are in our jails aren't being treated. At least not in any real way. And I felt like the Green Goblin was a really great entry point into starting to think about, yes, he's a horrible guy and there's terrible things going on, but maybe we can understand what's behind it. And that's what they did with all the villains, right?
That's right. Yeah, you got to see their nature and got to see that ultimately at the end of the day, with some care and compassion and sacrifice, ultimately from Tom Holland's Peter Parker, that they were able to be helped. Now, contrary to who we were supposed to root for in the movie, I think, I don't know. I kind of felt like he really should have pushed that button right away. I sat there thinking, like, I know this is necessary for the movie to move forward, but he should really push that button and send these people back to their universes. And this obviously isn't what we want to do in terms of theology or in terms of helping people in real life. But in the movie, it feels like, you know, these folks had already, the villains had died, and they got sent to Tom Holland.
Well, they had almost died. They'd almost died.
Almost died.
Everyone who lived past them in their timeline, they had died. But to them, the almost death moment and the coming into Tom Holland's Spider-Man 1's world was instantaneous. So for them, they hadn't died yet. But I do think that the feeling that you're articulating, because I did not think that some too.
Well, that's good to know, Mark. I wasn't just being a terrible person, being like, send them back.
Well, I don't think I thought
your universe apart.
I don't think I thought it as much as you did. No.
Oh, well, thanks, Mark.
But I do think that that's kind of the point of the whole movie. I mean, I think that was almost a setup. I think they wanted us to feel that way because it's the setup for why we needed the movie being told this way, which in my opinion is one of the very first times that we get a big production superhero movie that is completely, and we talked about this in some of our earlier shows, about redemption. It's about redeeming folks that, at least in that world, are the worst of the worst, and why it's important and why it matters. And
they get us to root for it. Which is kind of amazing. I mean, even though I wasn't really rooting for it, I was like, send them back. Your life's going to be a mess. And I mean, what are you going to do to the timelines in the other universes? Come on, Peter Parker, send them back. Even though I felt like that, still at the end of the day, as I listened to Aunt May, I'm like, he can help these people. he can be a part of making their lives better. They made me root for him.
And we see in Spider-Man 1 struggle, like, for instance, in Captain America Civil War, Spider-Man says, when you can do the things that I can do, but you don't, and then things go bad or things bad happen, they happen because of you. Now, I don't know that I completely agree with that statement, but I do like that the character knows that he needs to do the right things. But he still struggles with am I going to take the easy way or the right way? Because it's not always the same thing. And it takes his Aunt May dying again, not spoiler free. And she takes on Uncle Ben's line of great powers come with great responsibility. And it really is a poignant moment that you can just feel. And anybody who follows almost any superhero ultimately have heard some version of that. But it just felt like it hit home, and it was wonderful to watch him go through this roller coaster ride, because as she told him that, she was dying at the hand of the Green Goblin.
That's true. And I mean, at first he's filled with vengeance because of that, And ultimately, it is the other Spider-Man who come and help him to realize that, because he's not really resolved to what he's going to do until the Spider-Man 2, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and Spider-Man 3, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, and come and they help him to realize that it's important not to seek vengeance, because it's not going to do him any good. To live in vengeance. It's only going to do good if he helps the villains. It's only going to do good if he is doing what's ultimately good for his soul and good for his spirit, as if he's working for compassion and he's really working to help people like he's supposed to be as a superhero. And so I thought that was very fascinating. They didn't let him give in to violence, and it was accountability of friend network that really helped him go on. So, Mark, you brought up a lot of interesting political issues that this film raises, and I want to explore those more. I can't wait to hear more about some of the things that we find in Spider-Man that we don't find in a lot of other superhero movies. So maybe after the drop, let's come back and let's talk about political theology of Spider-Man.
Sounds good. Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus show. Caleb, like you were saying, there are really a lot of themes in Spider-Man No Way Home that really impact how we think about things, particularly maybe in the U.S. For me, the incarceration system just kept popping up and popping up and popping up.
Yeah.
Every time you turned around, you were thinking, well, we don't do that. Like, one simple thing was, the three Spider-Men ultimately were able to see that these people weren't just evil.
Right.
And that maybe there was something redeemable about them. And maybe with their power, there was some responsibility to at least try, And in the U.S., I don't know. I mean, I do know. It doesn't seem like that's what our system's set up for. I mean, it
doesn't.
Conceptually, a long time ago, that's what it was supposed to be. It was about actually helping reform folks. Yes.
Yeah, we've never done a good job of that.
No,
you're right. We all know the answer that we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about Batwoman, but that our system is much more interested in retribution than it is restoration. We want to punish people when they've done something wrong, and we've created a system that's designed to punish people,
right?
Not to really help rehabilitate people.
No, there's no. I mean, there are exceptions, obviously, but in most prisons, there's no real rehabilitation
right.
of systems that people can plug into. There are ones that are out there, and thank goodness that you can do after you get out of jail. But you've had all this time paying for a crime that we learned from watching Spider-Man. I mean, we already know it, but Spider-Man helps us relearn, rethink, remember that these folks might have been pushed into doing these kind of things. Yes, there's always better options, but they're not always capable of making those options. And we are a great nation. We are a great power, and we've got the money to do this. We have the resources in terms of even human resources to do that kind of thing, but we choose not to.
Yeah, and you brought forth a great point in the earlier segment where you mentioned mental health concerns. I mean, I think we're just growing to understand mental health in a more full way, and we're just beginning to realize, as more and more folks are breaking the silence on mental health struggles, how all of those things play together. And I think, considering how it is that we can work on our prison system in a way that fosters better mental health care and better rehabilitation, does a whole lot of good in thinking about how we can live in a better society where we're not just concerned with punishing people, I guess, for what we've considered them to have done wrong.
Right. Well, I mean, it goes back to something you said earlier about how it's just taking violence towards these villains, and that there's something about that folks won't. And what we have to learn, what we need to learn, is that only thing that violence does is teach us that violence is a solution. Now, so we cycle back into it. We'll do it again because it worked. In our minds, it worked. In our minds, it worked. And jail, the prison system in the U.S. is indefinitely violent. It is a violent thing we do to people.
It absolutely is.
Not because it doesn't have to be physical to be violent.
Right. That's right. It's violent in terms of separation from others. It's violent in terms of the things that we put people through. And I think, Mark, the things that you're talking about are biblical things as well.
Turns out.
Like not returning violence with violence. I think I've heard that somewhere.
There's something.
Where was that? Who said that?
I don't remember. I think it was an important character.
I think so. And so I in terms of not being focused on punishment, but in terms of thinking about how it is that we can restore ourselves to right relationship with other people, if we can focus on that, that's incredible. So I saw that theme as well too. I thought that the movie was making kind of an argument towards refugees in terms of refugees from other universes coming to this.
And you
MCU
wanted to hit the
universe.
button and send them back.
And he wanted to hit the button and
No,
send
you
them back.
said you wanted to.
Oh, that
I think you're
was before I made the connection, Mark.
you're weaving a web that you're not going to
Don't
get out
let
of
me
here, man.
in
Be
with
careful.
all these Trumpers or all.
I had to give you a hard time on that one. Sorry.
I
I hear what you're saying. I hear exactly what you're saying, and I agree. There is that theme in there, right?
But it's problematic, right? I think the
It is.
movie makes it in a problematic way. I think that's the argument it's trying to make, but
Mhm.
I think it makes it kind of problematically because they're all villains, right? It portrays the villains coming into the universe and then them getting rehabilitated. But I think that a lot of people view refugees like that. I've heard that a lot. I live here in San
Absolutely.
Diego by the border. We've got a huge refugee community in San Diego where refugees resettle. We're one of the top resettlement places in the United States. And I hear that all the time. Well, we don't want criminals coming in here.
Well, I mean, and we've had parties in the U.S., political parties, who work very hard to make sure that immigrants are villainized in our minds.
We've got
Well,
political parties like that.
I know
No
it's
way.
weird. You would think in the great nation of the United States that everybody would be doing the right thing and trying to treat people the correct way, particularly parties that might, want themselves to be seen as the Christian party, although there's
we do have a party like that, don't we?
Oh,
I
did not mean to be directly talking about any. Yeah, you're probably right.
No, of course
You're probably
not.
right. You're probably right. But no, I mean, something. It's amazing how much that impacts everything. For instance, the villainization of people in Mexico coming over is part of what was used when they made marijuana illegal.
Yeah,
is that that they're horrible folks who are high on marijuana and they're going to. Literally, there was an article in the New York Times that basically said that they're out in the streets decapitating moms. I mean, and then people buy into it.
That's crazy.
So we do. You're right. We have people who are actively trying to villainize because it gives them more of what they want, which is power and money and what they would consider purity.
Right. And so here's another thing that I found very interesting about Spider-Man No Way Home. Although we've seen this in quite a few movies lately as it's mirrored things that are happening in the real world. But I appreciated J. Jonah Jameson, portrayed by J.K. Simmons across the multiverse. He's always the same character. But the disingenuous media personalities who are influencing the narrative, just like you're talking about here, in terms of things like marijuana or in terms of things like refugees, that obviously we have seen this so much in the last 5-6 years. We've before that, but especially in the last 5-6 years, we've seen these media personalities control the narrative and do a whole lot of damage, just like J. Jonah Jameson does in the film.
Yeah, and he is brilliant in that role, and mirrors a couple of folks that are on a more conservative talk show kinds of world going on, and he does a beautiful job to show how that kind of rhetoric, particularly when it's repeated, because they did a lot of repeating for him, that people will buy into it, and won't necessarily process it as much as they need to, which is, it was both funny and horrible at the same time to watch him do that.
That's right, because it was funny in the sense of the show, and it was horrifying because it really happens, and we've seen it, right? It's not just this used to be kind of like a hypothetical thing. Whenever you'd see it in movies, to some degree, you'd be like, well, I can see where that might happen someday or whatever. But now it's like we've all seen it, and people believe these crazy commentaries and these commenters who just make things up. He's not necessarily making things up. He's putting his own spin on it. He's interpreting the events. We've seen even more horrific things in our real world as we've seen people just make things up.
Right. And to a degree, you're right. He's putting his own spin on it, but he is rewriting the narrative, and I think that's what we really see going on today. Far too much. Even I assume that there's probably a major cable news network that is actively doing that. You know, it's hard to get to the truth anymore. So who knows?
Some kind of it's like the name of some kind of animal. Not
Cat, something like cat.
Cat, yeah.
I don't remember. I don't remember.
You know, and so I think this is interesting too when we think about things that are going on right now in the world, and we think about the way that that Russia has influenced, you know, some stories that have emerged.
Well, I mean, we need
that they've done on social media and stuff in particular, and we've seen them now this week, this past week, act based on that kind of misinformation.
Exactly, and that's important to say. We're recording this just 5 days after they invaded Ukraine and all the things that they've done already that are breaking international war laws. And I mean, it's absolutely horrific. There's so much tragedy going on there. But I will say one of the things, the connections that as I've been listening and seeing the U.S. response is, I really the line of with great power comes great responsibility.
Great line
has really kept echoing as I listen to the Biden administration's efforts to do the right thing and to do it the right way. Like, they're going to help, but how do we do it in a way that not a lot of more people get hurt? It's been they're taking this idea of great power, because in the world, monetarily and militarily, the U.S. has great power. And it's been a very intelligent and measured response, which I think is part of that great responsibility, is to not just start, you know, throwing missiles at the problem or throwing rocks or beating the bad guys down, but instead saying, what is the best way to de-escalate this that's going to save the most people? I mean, we're at a point that there's no way that we save everyone, because there's already been way too many deaths. And as Putin isn't able to take over Kyiv, he's probably going to just escalate and escalate and escalate. So I will say I am usually very unhappy about the U.S. response to wars. But so far, this has been an intelligent, smart, even compassionate response to what's going on. I mean, what do you think?
Just think about what the response would have been had this happened a year and a half ago.
I have thought about that, and it scares me to death.
It would have been a nightmare. I mean, who knows? We might have had U.S. troops assisting Russia 2 years ago.
At least air support, and probably telling other nations to back off.
Absolutely. So, of course, there's a lot that remains to be seen, and we hope that our leaders will continue to recognize that great line that with great power comes great responsibility. Hey, Mark, this has been a blast talking about some of these items that the powerful themes in Spider-Man No Way Home. We're going to get ready for a drop. Our third segment is going to be a Q&A. And so no matter where you're watching from, if you have some questions for us, go ahead and drop a question in the comments section. We want to hear what you have to say. And whenever we come back, we're going to address any questions that are there. So let's listen to the drop. We'll see you on the other side.
All right, Caleb, we are back to the show and our Q&A segment. There's some weird things going on. We use Restream to broadcast. There's some odd things going on right now. It's not showing our themes in our broadcast. And it's also, Caleb, and this is the important part for you, when I go to the chat stream, all it shows me are who said something, but not what they said. So I'm hoping you might have a little something there that we could address. I know somebody had asked what is that drink, and I don't know if it was mine or yours, but
I think it's yours because it came in as you were trying to get your star.
trying to get that star off.
And I heard that yours won the competition for today, Mark. The one with coffee. People were excited about that.
One of the things is folks that are friends with me on social media know that I am a big coffee drinker. As much as I like bourbon, I also like coffee probably just as much. So it's not surprising.
That's a lot.
That is a lot. It really is a lot. Yes, it is. It is a deep, important love in my life. It's not nearly what my wife is. She's the most, the bestest, and my everything. But you know, coffee and bourbon and the dogs are kind of in the same space of love. You know, my kids are just above them, but you know, the rest of them are all just fighting for that third tier. They really are. They really are.
Well, if you had to rank it, coffee or bourbon, Mark, if you had to choose, what would you choose?
Honestly, that is such a great
philosophical question of today.
It ultimately would be coffee because it's better for me.
Okay.
I'm not saying it's good for me. I'm saying it's better for me. So it would ultimately be coffee because just on taste, just on pure enjoyment, they are neck and neck, and it just depends on the day. But yeah,
are you going to church? Are you going to lead worship, or are you going to Moonshine Jesus?
Exactly. It all depends. Yeah. So yes, and then someone I did see while we were doing the show mentioned that we should do a show. This is a novel idea on Star Trek.
That's right. Okay, so folks, if you're not following the Moonshine Jesus show, we want you to start following, and we want you to download our episodes because last week we talked about Star Trek Discovery. Yes. And we had a real interesting conversation.
Yes.
About
there were
that.
some similar themes, but not. So I still think that the commenter is correct. There's a lot of similar themes in Star Trek, particularly some of the. You and I were talking about the original series and Next Generation, and we're both big fans. And maybe they more clearly show these themes that we're talking about. So do know, not only should you go download our show and listen to last week's, but know that there will be future Star Trek shows so we can continue to investigate these kinds of questions. So I've got a question for you, though.
Okay, I'm ready.
So for those who are listeners, Caleb and I have a running spreadsheet where we plan out what we're going to be talking about, what future shows may be, and some ideas of what we're going to talk about. Caleb, you put an interesting thought, interesting comment, and I don't have it right in front of me, so I'll need your help on this. But I'm really curious. You mentioned the Trinity of Saviors. Do you see that as an intentional effort of the writers, directors? Were they trying to tip their hat a little bit? For instance, there's been Superman movies where it is very clear they are doing everything they can, even visually, to make him a Jesus savior.
Right.
So do you see Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3, not the movies, but the characters, as kind of a Trinity representation of any sort?
Yeah, so that kind of struck me as I was sitting there watching that. You know, a Trinity of Saviors was something, you know, as a clergy person that stuck out at me, and I thought, you know, would I make, you know, Tobey Maguire? He would be the father, and I guess Tom Holland, he would be the Christ figure, the son. He's the one who ultimately is making the sacrifice in the movie, and then Andrew Garfield is kind of like the Holy Spirit, and he's the one that you don't talk about as much. You're not quite sure you understand what to do with. He's there. So this is going. So I'm much more Unitarian in my theology.
Yeah,
I'm not really Trinitarian at all. But
I've actually written articles about no Trinity for me. So
yeah, no Trinity for me either. I'm not Trinitarian at all. But still, I think that's what was going on in the movie. I think they were aiming at a Trinity.
I asked the question because just reading what you wrote, I wasn't convinced.
Yeah.
Your argument, however, I think the Holy Spirit is a little bit of an iffy part of the argument, but the rest of it, actually, I'm with you. It makes a lot of sense. Even the way they wrote the characters. I mean, Spider-Man 2 was definitely kind of the wise guide, you know, the father figure, the and in a lot of ways, the creator, the first actual Spider-Man.
Right.
Created at least how we were going to begin to understand this character. And then, Peter Parker is definitely the sacrificial. I'm going to lose all this stuff to make things better.
So, Mark, I've got to ask you one question before we end the show today.
All right, here we go.
I need to know, what is your favorite Spider-Man movie? We've had, 8 of them in the last 20 years. Do you have a favorite Spider-Man movie?
I'm going to be honest, and I'm not playing to the crowd here. It's this one. I love that we got all 3 of them in it. Just that, the fan in me was kind of crazy about that. I love that we're talking about redeeming villains and not just, using force to subdue them. I loved everything about that. And it was just a really you and I before the show briefly talked about this. It's a 2.5-hour show. I didn't for a moment wonder if it was almost over.
That's right.
Like, I was almost disappointed. It was so well done. The pacing was perfect. Every scene was engaging in its own different way. Sometimes it was a visual engagement. Sometimes it was like a very thoughtful, like trying to get you to think about things. And so many Easter eggs. We didn't even get into any of that, but there were so many cool little Easter eggs. So that would be me. How about you? This is going to wrap it up.
That's right. You know what? I agree. I liked it. I liked the one before it too, where they were, traveling on a field trip. I thought that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that one.
I loved how that pulled out the high school theme.
It was so cool to see him, like trying to live a normal life, trying to be on a field trip and also fighting crime. But yeah, I'm with you. It was cool to see all the Spider-Man. I'm always game to see multiple people playing the same character in the same movie. I love it. I can't wait to see it in DC as well when we see multiple Batman. But I had a blast today, Mark. Thanks for talking about Spider-Man.
You too, man. Hey, thanks
for joining us.
Thanks for dressing up and being like Spider-Man.
Of course. I
really appreciate it very much. So all of you out there, we thank you for listening. If you're on the podcast so much, keep listening. We really appreciate it. Send us notes on social media about things you'd like to see us do, or ways you might thoughts about maybe changing anything up. Just let us know. We're very appreciative of all of you. Do go to the Moonshine Jesus Show on Facebook and follow us there, because within the coming week, we'll be announcing what our next show will be about and give you opportunities to participate, have your shout out on the air with questions that you ask. Hey, one final cheers to you, sir.
Cheers to you. I'm empty.
You've already hit the bottom. You've done well, sir. I'm impressed. All right. Thanks to everyone. We'll catch you the next time on
the Moonshine Jesus Show.